As Hans said, I'm working at CEP on returnees, or more specifically, their prosecution, rehabilitation, and reintegration. I've been focusing on several countries. The past year has been mostly about Germany and female returnees in Germany, their prosecution, as well as recent developments in repatriation. I have 2 papers published last year that you might find interesting. They're available on our website, and I'm also happy to send them to you if you're interested in those aspects. And in the course of last year, I have then started doing interviews with French actors, so governmental and non-governmental actors who are working in or around the criminal justice system in France, and who have experience in how France is prosecuting returnees. So not only female returnees, but male and female returnees in general. And I would also like to point out now that, as Hans mentioned, I'm part of a research project with the ICCT in The Hague, where Mark Hecker from IFRI is currently analyzing the prosecution of female returnees in France, which is really a great addition to what I'm already doing right now. And I'm very much looking forward to see how different countries are prosecuting female returnees once we have finish this research project. If you want to know more about it, also happy to discuss it with you. Just wanted to put it out there. There's more coming in the future. So having said that, in March this year, I published the latest policy paper, and I'm now taking the opportunity to present it to you, the main findings of it, also discuss it, and I'm really delighted that I'm joined by very esteemed colleagues who have been extensively working on the topic as well, focusing each on a bit of a different aspect of it. And I think it's really a good addition to this policy paper, and very much looking forward to how they see the issues. And yeah, very happy that they are contributing to this webinar. So first of all, content of this webinar is going to be very much about what I've written in the policy paper. I'm going to give a little bit of a context first, then how, in general, terrorism-related offences are prosecuted in France, then an overview of convictions so far of returnees in France, then the role of international criminal law, the prosecution of international crime so far, gender differences, so what's happening to the prosecution of female returnees, also going to be speaking about some challenges, and then giving some recommendations as I did in the paper, but of course more details is in the paper itself. So in terms of context, very briefly, I think there are several facts that are already established about Islamic State in Syria and Iraq, Europeans having gone there to fight, also females having gone there to join terrorist organizations such as Islamic State. And but in general, in terms of numbers, there were more than 5,300 European foreign terrorist fighters. That's roughly the number that we're counting with. And it's interesting to say that France has the largest group of these affiliates, almost 2,000 individuals. Some of them are children, but in overall, it's the biggest group, followed by affiliates from Germany and the UK. So that's why it's interesting to look at these countries that have a lot of people, and consequently also a lot of court cases. Most of them have joined terrorist organizations such as IS, but also, of course, other organizations. So in terms of what I understand as returnees, is basically anybody who has gone from France, so not necessarily a French national, but who has gone from France to travel to Syria and Iraq to, for example, join a terrorist organization, and then has returned to France. That's roughly the definition, so that you're aware of what we talked about today. That's enough as a context to start with. And first aspect that I'm developing a bit in the policy paper is that, so of course, the prosecution of returnees falls into the prosecution of terrorism-related offences. And the context here in France, I think, has really been impacting how the criminal justice system has approached these group of individuals. So the context that we have is that the criminal justice system in France has an enormously high caseload. They're not only the people who went, but also the people who tried to go to Syria and Iraq, who were stopped at the border, or maybe stopped in Turkey, sent back individuals that were involved in attack planning or in travel plans with state in France. So the amounts of cases that we're speaking about that have something to do with Syria and Iraq context and ISIS context is just very huge and putting a huge strain on the criminal justice system. And then at the same time, of course, this is connected. We have had a continuous increase in terrorist threat levels in France. Just recalling the Sharon Weill attacks in January 2015, and of course the attacks in Paris and around Paris in November 2015, and then continuously other smaller attacks that have contributed to have this terrorist threat level, both what security agencies perceive, but also what the public and the political sphere perceives extremely high. So there's a lot of attention on the issue of security, a lot of attention on how politicians are dealing with terrorism, how the criminal justice system is dealing with terrorist offenders. So that's just, I think, the context that we have to remember. And partly because of this, what does that mean for how returnees are prosecuted in France? So some of the key aspects that I would like to highlight here is that the main offense that is used in France is called AMT, so the Association of Wrongdoing in relation to a Terrorist Enterprise. So this is what has been used not only in the context of returnees. And what happened in 2016 is that AMT has been criminalized, which means that before it was an offense and now it is a crime, which increases the potential of sentencing, but also means that they are dealt with a specific court. So this first criminalization of AMT occurred because partly because of the Charlie Hebdo attacks. And the thinking behind it is that anybody from France who joined a terrorist group such as ISIS after the Charlie Hebdo attacks is seen in this context of wanting to hurt people in a terrorist attack. So just traveling is always connected to the terrorist attacks that have been happening in France, which means that it's charged as a crime. And this is this potential criminalization of AMT, which is normally used when it comes to returnees. And that's coming with this criminalization is that the potential sentences are increased. So they were continuously increased in the past 10 years, but from this point on, returnees who are charged normally for a criminal AMT can receive a prison sentence of 30 years or even life imprisonment when they were in a leading position. That doesn't mean that all of them get 30 years. It's still an exception, but still, compared to Germany, the highest sentence or the longest sentence for a terrorist membership is 10 years. So that gives you the understanding that there has been an increase of sentences. Another aspect also in this context is a specialization. So because of the high level of high caseload, in 2019, the criminal justice developed a National Anti-Terrorism Prosecutor's Office, the PNAT, who is responsible for prosecuting these kind of crimes. So it was putting more expertise in, more resources, and specialized in terrorism cases, which has been an important step for France. And also because of the criminalization of AMT, this terrorist charge is also dealt by specially composed assize courts, which also furthers that there are more and more experts dealing with terrorist cases and not changing judges. And then another aspect I wanted to highlight is the possibility in France to have trials in absentia, which basically means that defendant doesn't need to be in court when the trial is happening. Also, this should be, in a legal understanding, the last recourse, but the public pressure on prosecuting foreign terrorist fighters, even if they have not returned, makes this an important measure to use. So there have been, for example, ghost trials where 20 people were convicted, but they have not been in court. So I think that's these are all interesting aspects that come within this context that we have in France. And then finally, also, I will come to that point later on, increased joint investigations where returnees are charged for both terrorist offenses and charged under international criminal law. Very quickly, an overview of the convictions of returnees in France. These are numbers from January 2023, so there are constantly trials ongoing. So this just to give you an impression. So below the lowest figure is a bit over 300. So we have around 365, I believe, returnees who are adults. So they're also minors, but the majority are adults. And these, the majority of them have been prosecuted. And here you see the white number, these are men. So the majority of the prosecuted returnees are men. But you see that the women are a lesser number, but still a significant number. And then one up is the number of convicted returnees. So you also see almost 200 returnees have been convicted, most of them for AMT. And here we see that it's clear how much more men have been convicted so far as women. We will come to that point later. And then finally, the returnees who are still being investigated, much smaller number, but still investigations are ongoing. And here you see that the number of women is much higher, or is roughly the double of those men who are investigated. So more women are kind of now moving through the criminal justice system, and men have largely already gone through it, of those who returned. The majority of returnees in France are convicted by those assize courts who are treating with criminal AMT. Some cases have also been dismissed. That's why there is like a difference between the prosecuted and the convicted. Some were, very few cases, acquitted. In one case, the individual passed away. Sentences range between 1 year of a suspended sentence to life sentence. But mostly even women receive prison sentences. The charges that have been used were, of course, criminal AMT, attempted murder in relation with a terrorist enterprise, planning of violent action, so a terrorist attack, offenses relating to weapons or explosives in relation to terrorist attacks, apology for terrorism, and then also, mostly in the case of women, non-consensual removal of a child from the other parent. So when they have taken their children from their partner to Syria and Iraq, which is also an offense. And what's interesting here is that these offenses are missing an important aspect, which brings me to my next point, the prosecution of international crimes in France. To give you a bit of context, maybe, so I think it's quite obvious that if we consider the Islamic State in Syria and Iraq a terrorist organization, then of course the charges would be terrorist related, or the activities would be terrorist related. So that would be the criminal justice approach. But we have come to know in the past years that ISIS and also other terrorist organizations, but mainly ISIS, have also committed some of the worst crimes, so war crimes, crimes against humanity, genocide against members of the Yazidi community, but also crimes against Christians, other Muslims, Sunnis, but also Shias. And so this is, from a legal perspective, a different avenue, but it's also important to not focus too much on the terrorism aspect. But I come to that point later. So that's why France here, in prosecuting these kind of crimes, has not been going as far as to really bring a returnee before court and have him or her convicted for a core international crime. But in the past years, there have been increased efforts to do that. So here you see we have a number of parallel procedures, so where the war crimes unit and the terrorism unit are parallel, like on a parallel level, having a procedure for example, genocide, crimes against humanity, as well as AMT. Then we have joint investigations where these two units are working together. And then finally, we're also having some preliminary joint investigations, which are still in an early stage. One example, which is quite famous, is Sabri Essid, who is the first French foreign terrorist fighter charged with crimes against humanity, genocide, and criminal AMT. But some say he's dead. His whereabouts are not known. but the investigations against him and the charges against him are ongoing. There are several reasons for why this prosecution of international crimes is going more slowly, mainly because the access to evidence is very difficult, because actors from France cannot just simply go to Syria and, I don't know, ask a witness what she or he saw. So it's very difficult to establish these cases, much more difficult than to establish AMT. But there have been some really interesting developments in the past years. France has been part of a joint investigation team supported by Eurojust. It's easier to get legal information from other countries. And for example, mechanisms like UNITAD and IIIM, who are gathering evidence in Syria and Iraq, or from Syria and Iraq, they do not allow to respond. So they cannot respond to requests for only terrorism offenses. There needs to be a international crimes aspect to the question posed to them to get evidence. So that's encouraging countries to also include an international crimes aspect to their question to these mechanisms. But I'm happy to speak about that later on. I'm seeing that I'm already running out of time. So very quickly, aspect I wanted to mention also is the prosecution of female returnees. Basically, they can be prosecuted since 2015 at least, where already the travel and the stay in Syria and Iraq has been criminalized, so could be charged under AMT without them having been fighting, for example. But still there was for several reasons, and Constance will surely speak about this, were not really systematically prosecuted like men. And then this changed from around 2016, partly because there were several failed attacks in France involving women in a very active role. And then this led partly to the more systematic prosecution of female returnees as well. And now, as of 2023, we have roughly 40 convicted female returnees, and more trials are ongoing as female adults have been repatriated last year from northeastern Syria. But yeah, Constance will speak more about that. So some key challenges that I found in my conversations with these experts, I have mentioned some of them: limited resources, very high caseload, especially also war crimes unit has seemingly not enough resources to take on these very complicated cases, or could use more resources. Again, the access to, but also the use of evidence, how to use these kind of battlefield evidence in a French court, linked to the challenge of prosecuting international crimes. So we still have not seen a trial for that. A preventive approach to prosecution, very interesting. Sharon has done some amazing work on this aspect. It's basically about the pressure is so high to prevent further terrorist attacks that prosecution becomes part of that logic to also have very long pretrial detentions. But I'm happy to speak more about that later on. And then finally, related to, of course, a high number of cases, high number of convictions, also leading to a prison capacity that in France is already on a maximum. I think the latest number I saw is like 500% over, like 400% too many people incarcerated in a prison. And so with this challenge, I think security agencies are already very aware of it, to not only prevent attacks or radicalization in prison, but also what to do once, for example, a convicted returnee is released from prison and this rehabilitation or integration needs to be supported. That's going to be a future challenge. Several experts have confirmed. And then, of course, still a lack of repatriation of French nationals from northeastern Syria. And these challenges lead me to many thoughts, but basically 3 key recommendations. The first one is obviously, as in my other papers I've written, that it's urgent to repatriate French nationals, so men, women, and children from northeastern Syria and Iraq. France has moved on that question last year, but still a lot of things need to be done. 200 people still remaining, and not only for humanitarian concerns or legal obligations, but also for obvious security challenges that are related to this inaction. Another important aspect is that, as in the near future, very probably there are going to be trials that are involving crimes against members of the Yazidi community. It's something that we've learned in the German experience, is that there needs to be a stronger cooperation with Yazidi communities and NGOs. So involving them in the trials, supporting them with psychosocial support, for example, for victims of sexualized violence before, during, and after the trials. Improve also the conditions how members of the Yazidi community can participate in such trials, for example, by providing interpretation, translation, translating the judgments, for example. All these are, I think, steps that should be thought of already, because it's a lot about thought of accountability towards the Yazidi community. And then finally, something that has started but should be strengthened even further. So strengthen the efforts of joint investigations to enable this prosecution of core international crimes. So I've spoken a bit longer than I wanted, but this is really just roughly the main issues of the paper. I encourage you to read it, reach out for questions. And for now, thank you for your attention. I'm looking forward to your question, and also to my colleague's presentation. Thank you.